Hello, everyone. It's Larry Kotlikoff back with Economics Matters, the podcast. Today, I wanted to talk to you about life insurance. Question is, how much life insurance do you really need? Now, if you go back 20 years ago or so, when I was younger, I would kind of go onto different websites and look at what their life insurance calculators were telling me. And they said, well, it's very simple. Just multiply your current earnings by a number between 6 and 10, and that's the life insurance you need. And if you want to have more protection, make it more like 10. If you want to have less protection, 6, but you need between 6 and 10. This struck me as completely off base relative to what people really needed. The question about life insurance is that you have, well, in my case, I had a young family, two sons, and my wife at the time, were remarried. But the uh, the question was, if I were to pass away, since I was the primary earner, what did I need to leave my wife such that she could maintain her living standard through the rest of her days, and also the kids' living standard uh, through when they left the household. Also, taking into account the fact that uh, we're hoping to pay for some or all of their college and college tuition and other expenses. So that was really the calculation I was looking for, but I knew how to get it because back 31 years ago, I started developing our software, and actually the original, which is now called MaxiFi Planner. And as many of you know, I have a software company. We have two tools. One is the MaxiFi Planner, which does full lifetime financial planning. We sell it to households and to financial advisors for use with their clients. And we've had tens of thousands of people using the software over the years. But we also have this other tool, which is called Maximize My Social Security, which just helps people with figuring out their highest lifetime Social Security benefits. But anyway, back then we had a download version of our software called ES Planner Download, Economic Security Planner Download. That was before things got more, onto the web. And anyway, so I developed this software with co-workers in the company I formed, and I knew that that wasn't the right number, 6 to 10 times life insurance. Indeed, the whole way in which this company evolved or started was as a result of my working with an economist named Alan Auerbach, who's at Berkeley. We started writing papers about how much life insurance people should be buying and comparing that with what they actually were buying based on the data we were seeing in the survey of consumer finances, which the Federal Reserve surveys about 6,000 households around the country every year, every 3 years. And we said, well, let's do a study on the adequacy, an academic study, adequacy of life insurance holdings, comparing what people should hold with what people are holding. So this was the origins of starting to develop the code for ES Planner, which then became the code for MaxiFi Planner. So we had a very simple version of the software. We didn't include taxes or cash flow constraints or a zillion other things, let alone, we didn't have federal taxes, let alone state taxes. But I could see in doing this academic paper that, well, it was good enough for academic work, but it really wasn't good enough to give anybody advice. That you really had to do your homework and really get all these details. We have 42 different state income taxes, for example. So a survivor is going to have to pay income taxes. You need to know what the survivor's income taxes are going to be every year of their life. And that's going to change depending on when, how old the couple is. So if the couple starts at 30, well, the life insurance they need on each spouse to protect the other if they're both working is one thing, but if we go through time and the husband and wife are, let's say 35, let's say they're both the same age, well, if the husband dies at that point, the wife's taxes from that point on are going to be different. Also, her life insurance needs on his death, on his life, is different because they've accumulated some assets, some wealth, and they've accumulated some retirement account assets. And their kids might be older, or if they have kids, so fewer years to take care of the kids. So very complicated problem. They also may have plans about needing extra help if maybe the wife was to pass away, maybe the husband would need to hire an au pair, or maybe the husband would move to near his parents to help take care of the kids while he was working. All these things are critically important for figuring out how much life insurance you need. And MaxiFi Planner incorporates all this stuff now because we've been in business for 31 years. So we've had the time to work very carefully and slowly to build this incredible Swiss watch, which is very precise, which has all these things, but is not so complicated that people can easily use it. As I've said, tens of thousands of everyday households, rich houses, poor households, middle-class households are and have been using the software. But I want to show you some points about life insurance, and I'm going to demonstrate it with the software. And what I've set up is a case. Let me just get rid of some of the stuff that's getting in our way here. So I've set up a case where we have a couple, Jane and Frank, and Jane's 30 and Frank's 30, and Jane has earnings of $75,000 a year. And we're going to assume that in real terms, her earnings stay constant up through age 65 when she is going to retire and also take Social Security. So she's she's a middle-class worker earner. That's about the median salary or per capita income. It's actually it might be a little bit higher than the median salary in the US. Frank is earning $45,000, and he also has, a Social Security record just like Jane does. That they both started working after college at 35. So they, what else can we tell you about them? Well, they have no special receipts or expenses. Their strategy on Social Security, like their strategy on retirement, is to retire at actually their full retirement age, which is 66. That's when they're going to take Social Security. And I think what I said, when they were going to retire at, let me just check. So they're going to retire 65 and take Social Security at 66. So that's a little different from what I said. Anyway, what about financial assets? Well, at this point, they're both in 401k plans. Jane has $150,000 in her plan. There's a 3% matching contribution with her employer. So she's contributing 3%. He's contributing, the employer's contributing, or she's contributing, whoever the employer is, 3%. And Frank's also in a company plan, has 100K in assets, and so 3% contribution by Frank and a 3% match, and they've got 50K in the bank, and they're living in Minnesota. Oops, why did it say that? I think it got tired of waiting for me. Let me just go back here, log back in. That doesn't, I have like three versions of the program open, and one of them probably timed out. So that's why I got kicked off of this for a second. But let me just go back into the demo here and tell you the rest about the story. So they're living in the housing. They live in, sorry, Michigan, not Minnesota, where there's a state income tax they have to worry about, and there's also rent for 3K. So, like a lot of young people, they find buying a home very expensive, and so they've decided just to rent. And I'm just going to assume they're going to keep renting through the end of their days for 3K a month. They're making together, over about 115,000 bucks, maybe a little 120,000 bucks, and uh, so 3K a month is 36,000. So that's not crazy. And by the way, there are certainly certain advantages, tax advantages of owning homes. But if the cost of owning a home is too high, then renting may be the better move. And of course, you can compare renting versus moving in MaxiFi just by renting versus owning just by setting up alternative profiles. I've got like 3 different profiles in this case, and I could have had them buy a home in 5 years if I wanted to study that issue. But today I want to just talk about life insurance. What about their kids? Well, they have right now one child who was born 2 years ago, so a 2-year-old. And the settings are that they're going to start taking the retirement account money at 66, or no, yeah, 66, 60. Let's see, what year is that? I think they're going to start at 65. Sorry, they're going to start taking the retirement account money at 65, and we're going to assume that they're going to earn the safe rate of return that's available right now on tips around 2.25%, 2% in that range. Right now, we're assuming on this case a 2.25% safe real return. So that's a pretty conservative assumption. But this is our deterministic planning. We have stochastic planning, which is looking at the variability of one's living standard as one receives returns on risky assets if you really want to hold risky assets. But here we're just saying, what if they just play it safe and invest in inflation index bonds, for example, which are called TIPS, and earn around, they're currently yielding around 2%. So I'm running this case with 2.25%. So let me run the report here and see what it recommends with respect to the life insurance for the 2 spouses. So this is taking just about a second or so to run. That's pretty quick. And what you see is that their discretionary spending, which is the green bar here, the bars here are discretionary spending. In today's dollars, it's about $56,000 a year. Then when their child leaves the household, it drops down to $45,000. It doesn't drop by a third because there's economies of shared living. So having that extra child doesn't mean that their living expenses had to go up by a third if they wanted to maintain the same living standard per person. And here you see, anybody who's run the program before knows that we do lifetime budgeting here, and that all the lifetime resources that they have are equal to all the lifetime outlays. And so the program is involved in trying to simultaneously set smooth the household's living standard so they can have a living standard that's constant through time. So this is the living standard per person. Even after the kid leaves the household and the discretionary spending drops, the discretionary spending per household member with adjustments for economies of shared living and the fact that kids are less expensive than adults, that stays perfectly smooth. So the household is not cash flow constrained. If it were, the living standard would be lower and then jump up when they got out from under their house they're cash flow constrained. They're not facing that. They don't have any student loans that would constrain them or a mortgage. But they have to spend more money they have to spend more discretionary money on discretionary spending when there's more mouths to feed. So when there are fewer mouths to feed, then you drop your spending, but it's all being done within a lifetime budget that is being satisfied. So they're not spending a penny more in present lifetime value than they actually have to spend. So that's really important. So that this is the most important thing that economists kind of start with, which is you can't spend more than you have. You can't come to your planning exercise and say, well, I'd like to spend some number in retirement, or from this point on, I'd like to spend X because that's what I want to spend. That's my right because I see everybody else spending that kind of money, and well, I just deserve to spend it. Well, whatever number you set might be either too high or too low. So you want to have a program that keeps you honest with respect to having suggestions about what you spend that are consistent with what you have in resources, and that also are making sure you don't end up eating cat food as you get older. Now, the software allows you, under settings and assumptions, to have your living standard decline as you age. So if the couple had wanted to have a lower living standard after a certain age, they would go to this living standard index, and they would just enter values starting here, maybe starting when they were 75, when they can no longer travel so much or need so much in the way of other, entertainment, or going on skiing trips or whatever. They could have that index drop from 100 down to maybe 70 by the time they reached age 100. That we're planning for them to live to the maximum age of 100. And that would lead the program to, going back to the reports here, it would, and I've already run that report, so I can just show it to you again real quick. That would lead them to have a living standard profile that wasn't a flat line, but was higher earlier on and then declined gradually through age 100. And so you can have, the program will accommodate whatever living standard profile you'd like over your life cycle, but it'll do that subject to you not putting you into debt. So if you, for example, have a lot of money coming in the future, it's not going to have you spend, and you don't have that much right in the present, and you're cash flow constrained. It's not going to raise your living standard earlier on or your discretionary spending, because that would require borrowing against your future income or future inheritance, whatever it is, your future years in which you're not paying off your mortgage. But the program is not going to let that happen. So all the optimization here is subject to cash flow constraints. But to get back to the main point here, life insurance. So here we have the needs of how much Jane and Frank need to have in life insurance, so that if one of them dies, the other will have enough resources to maintain the living standard. And what is the living standard? Well, if we just go back here, it's 28,426 per year in today's dollars per person. So they want to maintain that living standard as survivors for themselves and their child. So if I come back here to life insurance suggestions, you can see the absolute amounts down here, and we also put them in nominal dollars. So these are in real dollars, and here's the premium in today's dollars and real dollars. And you can see that a couple reasonable things here. One is that Jane needs more life insurance In this case, she needs about $750,000 in life insurance if she dies this year to protect Frank and their child. And Frank needs less life insurance because he's a lower earner. He's earning only 45,000. She's earning 75,000 a year, and so there's not that much as much future earnings of Frank that have to be protected via life insurance, whereas there's more in the case of Jane. But then as they get older, you can see that the life insurance is basically declining. Sometimes it goes up a little bit, and that's because they're accumulating wealth, and that can push them into a higher tax bracket. And then if somebody dies, when they're in a higher tax bracket, then the survivor may need more money in order to pay the higher taxes than had the person died a couple of years before, when they had less wealth accumulated, and therefore were the survivor was not going to be in such a high tax bracket based on, for example, the asset income that they were receiving and had to pay taxes on. I'm not talking about the money in the IRAs or in the 401k plans here. I'm talking about regular asset accumulation. So this has a lot of common sense to it in terms of the results. But let me just show you a couple of things that are different. If first of all, I want to make sure that this calculation is correct. So let's just go back and double check what their living standard is, which is 28,426. So maybe you could keep that in mind, 20,426. And let me just run a different report, which is a survivor report, where I kill off Jane this year. So Frank is going to be the survivor, and Jane's going to die this year. So let's run Frank's survivor report. It's going to look just like what we just saw, but it's just Frank as a survivor after Jane dies. And the key thing I want to look at, and you have all the same results and a entire plan for what Frank as a survivor should spend and save. But does the life insurance deliver the same living standard? Well, there it is, 28,426. We have calculated for Jane to the dollar the life insurance that she needs in 2024, such that if she dies at the end of 2024, Frank, starting in 2025, that's where the report starts, is going to have exactly the same living standard as if Jane had not died. And it's not just his living standard, but it's the living standard for their child, who's going to be age 5 at that point. Now, what happens if we kill off Jane a couple years later? So let's have Frank be again the survivor, but let's have Jane die in 2029. Okay, and a lot of people have fun with this because I like to sit here and think about killing off their spouse and seeing how they'll do. But just joking on that one. Nobody should harm their spouse in any way, shape, or form. But let's see whether we have the same living standard in this case, 28,426. So what we're finding is that the life insurance that we're calculating for every year, not just for the first year, but for every year in the future, and it's changing every year because things are different depending on when people die. They're different for the survivor. We're finding exactly to the dollar the life insurance amount such that the survivor can have exactly the same living standard. This is like light years beyond telling somebody they need 6 to 10 times their earnings as life insurance. And that's what the advice was back then. My guess is it's equally crude right now because there's only one program on the planet that can make these kinds of complicated calculations under the hood. But you saw how fast the program runs and how user-friendly it is to see what's going on. Now, the other thing is that when we're making these calculations, we're looking at Frank's taxes, FICA taxes, federal taxes, state income taxes in Michigan for the rest of his life. So we're calculating all these taxes in we're showing them in today's dollars. All the calculations are being done in nominal terms because that's how tax law works. Not everything's indexed for inflation properly, especially Social Security benefit taxation, for example. So we need to calculate the taxes. And so the taxes for Frank going into the future are going to be different if Jane dies this year. They're going to be different if she dies next year, when, for example, he's 50. His taxes when he's 50 are going to be different if she dies in 3 years. So these are all state contingent taxes. All these taxes are being calculated going right through the tax forms of the state of Michigan and the 1040 form for the IRS every year in the future under all contingencies. So it's not just that we're calculating taxes when both people live to the maximum age of life. We're calculating taxes along every single possible survivor path. So we're also calculating whether Frank might need to buy life insurance to protect their child. Because, there's cases, in this case, there's no need for life insurance for Frank. If he were to pass away as a widower, his daughter or son would have more than enough money to maintain their the same. Actually, they'd be able to maintain a higher living standard. And going back to the reports here, if I look at the base plan, not the survivor plan, but I run the base plan again and just look at the recommendations on life insurance. I told you that the life insurance gradually declines because there's less to insure. So here's the life insurance recommendations, and you can see at this point, they're down to 0. And you can tell, by the way, you can tell the program, by the way, that you don't want to buy life insurance beyond a certain age because it might be too expensive in terms of you might prefer to take the risk of not buying it because life insurance premiums can be very expensive. And we calculate internally these premiums, and you can see that they rise as your probability of dying increases. They get bigger. And of course, it depends on how much your life insurance you need to buy, but the premium per dollar of coverage can be very expensive as you get beyond your age 60. And you might also become uninsurable in the sense that the premiums are so high because your pre-existing medical condition is such that no insurer will cover you without charging you an arm and a leg. So the program, under settings and assumptions, lets you basically turn off life insurance purchase after a certain age that you would specify. But in any case, we haven't set that here, but the program is naturally saying at this point, hey, they don't need life insurance. They're retired, and or they have very low earnings at that point. And what this means, since it's not calling for life insurance, is that if we run the survivor report having, let's say, Jane or Frank die in this year, I guess that's 2082, that the survivor, let's say if Jane were to die, Frank would have a higher living standard than the living standard that we have been talking about, which is 28,426. So at some point, if your spouse dies, you're actually better off as a survivor in terms of your living standard because you don't have to pay for their food, clothing, other expenses So you can actually afford a higher living standard. So the software is figuring out your life insurance subject to a non-negativity as a constraint. And that's the economic lingo here, which is that a negative life insurance would really be like buying an annuity. That turns out to be the case. But we only buy life insurance when it's needed to maintain the living standard. When the living standard would otherwise be higher without the life insurance, we have the program just doesn't buy any life insurance for the spouse whose death would produce an even higher living standard for the survivor and any children around. So let me look at another case here. What if this thing logged me out, so I've just, still in. Okay, so what if the couple had already had two kids? So this is quite interesting. I'm just going to run the base case and compare it with what we just saw. So here's the thing. If you have two kids, you'd think, well, you need more life insurance. Well, the program actually says you need less life insurance. And I'm going to show you, first of all, what the program says. And it says, well, Jane doesn't need like $750,000 in life insurance this year in 2024 to protect Frank's and the child's and the two children's living standard. In this case, they've got two kids. One is born 2 years ago, so they have a 2-year-old, and the other child's was just born in January of the current year. So they have a 0-year-old and a 2-year-old. So two kids, but what the program is saying is that Jane needs less life insurance if she dies to maintain the living standard for Frank and the two kids. Why could that be possibly the right answer? Well, the reason is because when you have an extra kid, you are choosing to have a lower living standard for yourself and the first child for the rest of your life, because you have a fixed amount of resources and more mouths to feed. So the living standard per person is lower. So therefore, there's less to protect in terms, the living standard is lower that both the spouses are going to enjoy if they continue to live to their maximum age, or if somebody dies. The living standard is no longer what we had before, but it's down to, I think we had 28, now we're down to 27,000. So let me just double check that, because I want to just run that against the other case, this is the case where we had, it was 28,000. And now in this case, 28,426. In this case, we have 27,119. So that's about, $600, $550 or so different for in terms of the living standard, but it's per person, it's per 3 people. So that's like $15,000 a year, roughly. I'm not taking into account the economies of shared living in that statement. So this is the reason that, I've never actually discussed this with users of our software in a podcast before, but I thought because I've been talking about so many other issues with our software. But this is very interesting, and it's something I saw back, 20 years ago. I realized that this was the case. I wrote about it in my book, Money Magic, I believe, that if you have more kids, you actually may need less life insurance, because the living standard that you've agreed to live with is going to be lower per person. And so therefore survivors need less money to maintain their lower living standard. Now, so that's surprising. You'd never get this from traditional life insurance calculators. It would never look like this. It would uh, be very different because the living standard would not be appropriately adjusted in accordance with what the household can actually afford. If they've got more kids, they've got another mouth to feed, and so their resources haven't changed, and the spending hasn't changed, but it's being spread over more more mouths, if you like, and more people, and therefore the living standard per person is lower. So let me now show you something else that I just ran that uh, found quite interesting. So this is the life insurance needs if the couple is going to have a second child in 2 years. And so I ran the program specifying that the household has one kid already who was born 2 years ago, the 2-year-old, and they don't have a child that was born this year. They have a child that's going to be born in 2 years. So this leads to some very interesting and surprising results as well. So let me show you what happens in this case. It was taking a tad longer, but not much. So here's if they both live to 100, because they have another child coming along, once that child arrives, they have to spend more. So discretionary spending jumps up because you need to spend more when there are more mouths to feed. And then the first child leaves the household and they get to spend less because there's no longer an extra mouth to feed. But then the second child leaves the household. So this is doing exactly what you would expect to see happen. And the living standard per adult here is because I have 2 kids, it's around 26,991, a little lower than it was before when they had and that has to do with accumulating up money for knowing that they're saving more in the short run, so therefore they have more asset income through time, and therefore they're going to be paying more taxes. So taxes turn out to be a very interesting part of the story here, getting the taxes right. So here you have a really interesting picture of the life insurance needs of the couple. You would never guess that this was going to happen unless you saw this. And I frankly hadn't run this case and looked at this type of a case in 31 years. I've never looked at a case like this where the couple has children coming in the future, where they're planning for kids to come in the future. And I never looked at the life insurance pattern. And you see that it kind of looks like a stegosaurus. It's got a big tail, doesn't have any clubs at the end. But anyway, at the beginning, and this is like the body of the stegosaurus. So it's really quite interesting. Why is this correct? And, you can run these survivor reports and see that to the dollar, what I showed you before is that these are the right amounts to maintain the living standard of the couple. But here's the thing: when the couple is in these 2 years before the second child arrives, if for example Jane dies this year, well, the program knows that second child is not going to show up because the husband's not around they're not around to have the second child. So that's the assumption that we're making here, that you're not going to have a child from 2 parents 2 years from now if one of the parent dies this year. And so therefore the living standard per household member, as I've just told you, is going to be higher in the case that, we're trying to replicate the living standard, but no, here's what's really going on. Now I have to recall, I misstated that. We're providing the same living standard as if nobody had died in these cases, but the per household member, whether or not they have one kid or whether or not they have two kids, we're making sure that everybody can have the same living standard as if nobody had died in every year in the future. So there's no change in the living standard across going from 2 years to 3 years in the living standard of survivors. So I was kind of misstating that. But what's different here is taxes. When they have an extra child, they're going to get additional child tax credits, and they're also going to be paying different taxes because the expenditure pattern is going to be different. So how much regular assets they're going to be accumulating is going to be different. So when I go from, for example, these 2 years to this year, and I look at the survivor report for Frank, if Jane dies here versus later on, I see that Frank's taxes as a survivor are lower, and they're lower pretty much every year into the rest of his life. But in some years, they're significantly lower. So because the taxes are lower, if Jane doesn't die in the first 2 years and they've made it to the third year or the fourth year or the fifth year, well, they will know from our program that if Jane dies at that point, the taxes will be lower because they have two kids, not one kid, but two kids. And because of that second child, they'll have child tax credits, some additional child tax credits. And then there's some other aspects of having accumulated less regular assets, which will mean less regular asset income, which will mean less taxable income. And that will also mean that Frank's spending needs are lower as a result. So you can always double check, run survivor reports to make sure the living standard is exactly the same as if nobody had died. And whenever the program is recommending life insurance for the person who dies, make sure the survivor, you can just see that the survivor report shows the same living standard. But again, if the person dies with no life insurance, it means that the survivor will have a higher living standard, and you can verify that as well, because you can kill off Jane, for example, in years when Jane is not buying any life insurance for Frank, or kill off Frank in years when he's not buying any life insurance for Jane. Obviously, if the couple were different ages, for example, if Frank were older, maybe Frank were, let's say he's 10 years older, then his life insurance needs would end before Jane's. So that, the blue bars would be at zero many years before Jane's red bars go to zero, because what you're doing here is ensuring future labor income. That's what goes away when somebody dies. And if Frank is older, he's going to get closer to his retirement sooner than Jane, right? So that's why the program will recommend that he stop buying life insurance before Jane. So anyway, I hope, let me just kind of flip this off, stop the sharing, and just come back and say goodbye. I hope this has been educational, but also our software is, incredibly inexpensive to get this number right. this is really important to get right. And I don't want to say that if you run our software and you have more life insurance than our software recommends, that anybody should cut their life insurance. I think it's better to have more insurance than less. Okay. So if you're overinsured, good for you. Okay. Because that means your survivors will have an even higher living standard. And guess what? They may be very upset if you pass away, and they might need to go on extra vacations. But the other thing is that the program can do contingent planning, which I haven't shown you yet. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna just take a little second here to go back and show that to you, because it's rather important, and it's another features of our software that that you need to know about. So I did run in the base case, and the base case, if you recall, was one in which they just have one child. They're not going to have another child. They don't have two kids. They just have the one child, and the one child is right there. Oh, I ran the wrong client. I'm going to run the life insurance demo. That's the one child case. So what happens if Frank needs an au pair if Jane dies? Frank's not that great taking care of kids, maybe, or his job is not a remote job. He has to go into the office, so he needs to hire an au pair for 10 years. Well, I put in here under special expenses a contingent plan where if Jane dies, Frank is going to need an au pair for $30K a year for 10 years. So how does that change their life insurance needs? Well, let me run that report. I'm going to compare that with the base plan. So and then we're going to see that Jane needs to buy more life insurance to protect Frank. Obviously, paying for the au pair is going to, or paying for the extra life insurance is going to lower their lifetime discretionary spending. So that's what you're seeing here. But I want to do a comparison of the life insurance needs of for how much does Frank need. So here's Jane's life insurance. And you can see that in the solid red line, which is the case where we have this contingent special expense. If Jane dies, Frank needs to have an au pair for 10 years for the kids. Well, you can see that the life insurance amount goes up from about $757,000 to $1 million. So she needs about $250,000 more in life insurance to help pay for that au pair if he dies. Let me run yet another case here, a contingent plan where there's no au pair, but what Frank does is he moves to Tennessee, keeps his job, or gets another job for $45K. And then why does he move to Tennessee? Well, his parents live in Tennessee and they're retired and they're going to take care of the child when he's at work. And because rents are less expensive in Tennessee, they're going to go from spending $3,000 a month to $2,000 a month. And so let's take that case. And now we're going to run the report. I'm going to compare it with the base plan. And we just saw before that if they stayed in Michigan and Frank needed an au pair, that Jane would need $250,000 or so more in life insurance. Now let's compare the life insurance amounts, and you can see that Jane actually needs far less life insurance, not $757,000, but $124,000 in life insurance. that's dramatically lower. And because of that, Frank's the couple's lifetime discretionary spending, if nobody dies, is 23,000 more higher because they're not paying so much in life insurance premiums for Jane's life insurance, because Jane is now buying, dramatically less life insurance because they have a plan, which is like an insurance plan, but it's twofold. One is lower your housing expenses, and the other is have your parents be your au pair. Okay. And if you have that potential, then you don't need as much life insurance. No other software has contingent planning. We have contingent planning for special receipts. We have contingent planning for special expenses. We have contingent planning for earnings. If your spouse dies and you don't want to have an au pair and you want to start working part-time to take care of young children, you can specify that as contingent. If your spouse dies, your earnings will drop. Or maybe you're working not at all. And if your spouse dies, you'll go back to work and you'll hire an au pair. So you can specify that. Contingent planning for housing, as I mentioned. So all this stuff matters to everything, to your whole path of spending, your taxes, federal and state, even your Medicare Part B premiums later in life. And your Social Security benefits. And by the way, Social Security survivor benefits are being fully incorporated in this analysis. And you can look at the survivor reports and can run a survivor report and look at the Social Security benefits that are available. And of course, if you're not working, if you decide, for example, not to work after your spouse dies, or to earn very little, so that you're not going to be subject to the earnings test that takes away your benefits if you earn more than, in this year, $22,230, 50 cents on the dollar. But let's say you're earning below that amount. Well, then you can collect a mother or father's benefit. Frank would collect a father's benefit, which is basically a survivor benefit for him, because he's taking care of his child or children, depending on how many he has. And in addition, the children will receive child survivor benefits because their mom has passed away. So they can start collecting benefits. And those benefits are incorporated in the program. And that impacts how much life insurance is needed. So this is serious stuff. You don't want to be buying necessarily $600,000 more in life insurance and paying, whatever, couple K a year or 1,000. Well, they're young, so their life insurance costs are not that high, but you don't want to be spending more than you really need. I mean, I'm for more life insurance than less. So because there's always things that maybe somebody doesn't incorporate in the program, and this is just suggestive information. I'm not a life insurance professional. I'm not a financial planning professional. I just have a PhD in economics from Harvard. I've just been working in this field since almost 50. Since getting a PhD, I worked on personal finance in my dissertation. So I just have this background. It's not a online course in to be a certified financial advisor planner. I don't have one of the 240 credentials that that FINRA, which is the financial industries regulatory authority, will list on its list of credentials. I don't have any of those 240 credentials. I just have a PhD from Harvard University, and I've worked in this area for decades, writing papers on personal finance, developing the software, and then also writing papers in finance, just regular hardcore finance, about asset pricing and things of that nature. So and many other topics, but I'm not a registered financial anything. So you have to take everything I say as educational and suggestive, and make sure that when you're running this program, the whole idea is when you're running deterministic planning is to make super conservative assumptions about when you're going to retire, how much you're possibly going to be able to earn. Be conservative. What rate of return you're going to earn on your assets. We're assuming the TIPS return because that's the safest asset in the really in the world, and it's not the average return on the stock market, which is about 6.5% real. We're talking about running this with 2.25%. So be careful running anybody's software, including ours, to make sure that you put in conservative assumptions. And that's pretty much it for today. So I want to again stop this thing. I'm glad I didn't forget to talk to you about contingent planning. It's very important. So we spent an hour. I think it was an hour well worth spending. And you can go to MaxiFi.com, purchase our software. It's $149 for the premium version. These calculations there's a $109 version that you can buy if you don't want to do the stochastic planning. If you just want to look at deterministic planning and life insurance issues, including life insurance issues, it's only $109. Why not get that right? If you get that wrong, you can be A, buying far too little life insurance, B, buying far too much life insurance, and then C, potentially well, if you buy far too much life insurance, paying far more than $109 in excessive premiums. So that's it for today. Thanks so much for attending, and look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.